One of the best relationships in comic books is the one between Superman and Lois Lane from DC Comics. Since their first encounter in 1938, they have gone a long way. There aren't many comic book couples who are more well-known than the Man of Steel and his driven wife. They are one of the few. Despite the challenges they've faced along the way, Superman and Lois Lane have established themselves as one of the most famous and long-lasting couples in the annals of comic book history. Despite the fact that deaths, reboots, and universal dangers have kept them apart, the pair has persevered and continues to be one of the most compelling couples in DC Comics series. The popularity of the television series Superman and Lois demonstrates that viewers appreciate seeing the more human side of Superman, as well as his love for his reporter wife. It was obvious that these two would eventually get together the moment that fans were first introduced to the characters in the year 1938. Therefore, in this video, you will witness a history of their time together as a couple. Their encounter during the Golden Age was a momentous occasion. Both Lois Lane and Superman made their first appearances in the same issue of Action Comics in 1938, which was written by Joel Siegel and drawn by Joe Shuster. In this issue, Clark Kent and Lois Lane dance together, although she does not seem to be interested in him at all. After being contacted by a criminal, Lois turns the man down and walks away, but he follows her and abducts her shortly after she departs. After that, Superman comes to the rescue and rescues her, which is the first instance of a pattern that would go on throughout the Golden Age. Throughout this time period, Lois would continue to see Clark as a coward and an inconvenience, much to Clark's enjoyment. Nonetheless, this seed would eventually grow into her obsession with Superman. Shortly after the first time Lois and Superman met, Lois gave Superman a kiss. During the events of the 5th issue of Action Comics published by Siegel and Shuster, Superman was defending citizens from an impending dam failure. The fearless Lois Lane boarded a cab and headed towards the tragedy to meet Superman, but she was oblivious to the danger that she was putting herself in. Lois's automobile was carried away by the torrent of water that poured through the dam when it collapsed. It seemed certain that Superman would come to her aid, so when he did, she was quick to express her gratitude by giving him a passionate kiss and declaring her love for the hero. Clark suddenly reappeared in front of Lois as she was insulting him as a spineless worm, after Superman had vanished suddenly but left a clue that they would meet again in the future. This moment demonstrated Lois's worst contempt for Clark and her unsatisfied desire for the Man of Steel, making fake weddings, flirting, and putting up a fight for love. The character of Lois Lane underwent a significant transformation around the year 1956 when the Silver Age began. Even more so than before, Lois was portrayed as a helpless damsel, and the majority of the plotlines involving her centered on her love for Superman. In certain instances, she even competed with Lana Lang and other characters like Lori Lamaris for Superman's affections. She was also easily persuaded to believe that Superman and Clark Kent were not the same person during this time period, despite the fact that she was preoccupied with demonstrating that they were. Throughout the course of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, a series centered on the reporter, the pair would go through a number of marriages and engage in playful banter with one another. In the first issue of the series, Lois tried to capture the hero's affection by impersonating a cook at a restaurant, but she was unsuccessful. Strange love triangles eventually become the comic's signature device. First, Lois and Clark are married, and then Superman and Lois tie the knot. In the comics of the Silver Age, Clark and Lois spent years debating whether or not they should be married. It wasn't until the Bronze Age that they really did it. In 1978, the pair tied the knot, and shortly afterward, Lois was presented with irrefutable evidence that Clark Kent and Superman are one and the same person. Unfortunately, Clark's mind was affected during this time, and as a result, he forgot that he was Superman. After Lois was able to assist in the recovery of Superman's memories, the Man of Steel made the decision to remarry Lois in his Fortress of Solitude. Despite the fact that they were able to maintain their marriage and it had the potential to have a long-lasting benefits for both of them, a problem was on the horizon. Even a major problem was not enough to keep them apart. After the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, the relationship between Superman and Lois Lane was severed, and their narrative was recreated by a number of other authors. John Byrne's run on Superman, the Man of Steel, which began in 1986, was responsible for the character's revival. The changes also affected Lois Lane, as well as her connection with the hero. In this version of the story, Lois Lane does not fall in love with Superman, but rather with Clark Kent. Co-workers at first, Lois ultimately warmed up to Clark to the point that the two began dating. In the beginning, Lois wasn't especially fond of Clark, but as time went on, she grew to like him more and more. Their connection would only strengthen from that point on. Lois is the recipient of Clark's confession. In the run written by Byrne, Lois and Clark fell in love rather soon. Because of the growing depth for their connection, it became more difficult for Clark to conceal his identity from Lois. In February of 1991, fans finally got the answer to their prayers when the two actors resumed their old dynamic, after years of yearning for them to get back together and develop closer. After Silver Banshee's attack on Clark Kent, Lois was left alone in their apartment to wait for Clark to return as Superman, after he had gone out to fight the monster. After the evil who drank people's lives was defeated, he went back to Lois. He took off his spectacles and divulged to her the identity of his superhero ego when he realized he could no longer conceal his secret from her. The wedding of Superman and Lois Lane again. It was not immediately clear when Lois and Clark would wed again. Even though they were separated by death, resurrection, and a few other plot threads, the pair was ultimately able to be married in the film Superman: The Wedding Album, which was released in 1996. Artists and writers who have worked on past Superman runs, including John Byrne, Terry Austin, and Dan Jurgens, came together to work on this issue. In spite of a string of shenanigans put by characters like Mr. Mixie Spitlick and Maxima, Lois and Clark eventually spoke their vows to each other and entered into the ties of marriage. Since the pair had been living together as unmarried since 1985, this event marked the end of an era in many respects. The family decides to adopt a Kryptonian baby. Lor-Zod, the biological son of General Zod, arrived on Earth in 2006 and shocked the whole globe with his arrival. Superman and Lois Lane decided to adopt the boy in order to shield him from the authority of the government. They brought him up as their own and gave him the name Christopher Kent. This was a welcome improvement, as it showed that the parents were making an effort to teach and safeguard their kid from other influences that may potentially damage or exploit him. The pair proved to be excellent parents and quickly adapted to their new responsibilities. Unfortuitously, things went from bad to worse when Christopher's biological parents finally arrived to get him, and he went back to the Phantom Zone. In the New 52, Superman and Lois Lane were not together anymore. The whole DC universe was given a fresh start after the crossover event known as Flashpoint, which took place in 2011 and was written by Geoff Johns and illustrated by Andy Kubert. The characters of Superman and Lois Lane were brought back, but this time the two of them did not have a love connection. For a significant portion of the New 56 continuity, the two would continue to function primarily in a professional capacity. Instead of Lois, Superman sought a romantic connection with Wonder Woman, continuing a convoluted character dynamic that dates back to the Golden Age. Lois was not happy with this development. The fact that the reporters didn't seem to have any kind of connection with one another was criticized by the audience. But very quickly, a significant shift in circumstances would propel the pair back into the public eye. After the events of the crisis, Superman and Lois Lane returned with their son. Superman's life has restored to normal when Lois Lane and the version of Superman that existed before Flashpoint were reinstated in the primary DC world. In the 2015 graphic novel Superman, Lois and Clark, written by Dan Jurgens and illustrated by Lee Weeks, the couple's lives were examined and their son was introduced. The series demonstrated that the pair had been carrying on a covert relationship for a significant amount of time. It marked the comeback of one of the most well-known couples in comics, which was exciting for the lovers of the medium. In addition to this, Rebirth introduced a new family dynamic for the pair, as well as further chances for their son, John Kent, who ultimately formed the Super Sons with Damian Wayne, the son of Batman. In spite of persistent danger, the couple has chosen to remain together. Since 2015, Superman and Lois's relationship hasn't evolved all that much in my opinion. Despite Superman's obligations as the most powerful vigilante on Earth, the couple has chosen to remain married. The two have stayed together and provided a support structure for their now older son John, who has also chosen the moniker Superman. Although Superman has been kept busy by a few crises and off-world wars, the two have remained married. Because DC Comics, in particular, has a propensity to start over with its characters, it is made impossible to say what the future holds for these characters. On the other hand, it is reasonable to assume that Lois and Clark will maintain their joyful relationship. Fans may anticipate that the couple will continue to spend their lives together for many years to come because of two things: their unbreakable connection and their kid John. You have just seen the most beautiful roller coaster of love that the two of them have for one another. Click the like button if you'd like to see more videos just like the one you're watching now. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll be waiting for you in the next video.